Live. Live from the campus of Purdue University. This is Election Night 2018 with results, analysis, and reaction. Brought to you by the Brian Lamb School of Communication, the Center for C-SPAN Scholarship and Engagement, Departments of History and Political Science, and Pi Sigma Alpha.
Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to another hour of election night coverage here on Fast Track News. Mike Folta, Maggie Merskevich, and our special guest, Steve Bell, here alongside us. Steve, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
And now we're going to go back to Carly Miller, who's going to start another panel for us right now.
And I'm here with some exit polling panelists to talk about what they've been working on today. But before we get started, let's go ahead and have each of you introduce yourselves.
Hey, I'm Rahul. I'm a senior political science major.
Hi, I'm Nia. I'm a social studies education major.
I'm Andy, and I'm in exploratory studies, and I'm a freshman.
Good evening. I'm Adam Welker, and I'm majoring in political science and history.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So, Adam, do you want to go ahead and just start us off by talking about what you've been doing at the polls today and what exit polling is?
Yep. So I think it's pretty interesting. I mean, we've seen huge numbers comes out for the midterm elections. So what we wanted to do is we were wanting to make sure that people knew that we were nonpartisan and that their polling would be anonymous. And we really wanted to gather data to see if there are any trends in polling. And we also wanted to make sure that that people knew about the anonymity so that they could answer honestly, because people tend to not answer honestly if they know that they're being tracked. So we wanted to make sure that that honesty was genuine.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So, Andy, do you want to talk about what the conditions were like at the polls for you today?
So I was at the Purdue Memorial Union, and that was most likely the center with the highest voter turnout that any of us were at. It was majority college students because that's the most convenient area for anyone going to Purdue to vote at. But there were adults as well, more adults. And the majority of people were very, very friendly. We actually ran out of surveys because so many people were willing to take them. And because we were such a high traffic area, I was also interviewed by the local news, as well as other people who had taken the surveys were also interviewed. So that was pretty cool.
That's awesome for you. Thank you. And Nia, what were the polls like for you today?
So my experience was completely different from the Memorial Union. I was at Clark Community Center, which is in this really rural town about 30 minutes away from here. And there was maybe one voter every 10 minutes, 15 minutes or so. It was very slow, but it definitely seemed like in that small town that a lot of people were coming out and voting, because you definitely saw just a couple of houses here, and it was a very small place, but a lot of people were coming out and still voting anyway. So that was
good.
Really nice.
That's good. It's interesting to hear how different your guys' experiences were. And Raul, do you want to share with us what your experience was like?
Yeah, sure. So I was actually in the same place as Nia was, but I actually went earlier with the group, and it was a similar experience in a way, but we definitely got more people turning up. We went earlier in the morning, so people would go before work, or the older generation would come in before going back home to take care of their grandkids and things like that. So we got a lot of those type of people, a lot of working class, a lot of older people, and it was definitely an interesting experience. It was a different kind of vibe that I thought we would get when we first pulled up over there, and I was in a way pleasantly surprised. Everyone was very talkative. Everyone was really excited to be voting. They kept saying, "Hey, did you guys vote? Did you guys vote?" So yeah, I really enjoyed my polling experience. It was a little chilly out there, but besides that, it was pretty good.
Way to push through. So, Adam, do you want to talk about some of the key races that you were experiencing today?
So I think one race that's very interesting is the race between Joe Donnelly and Mike Braun. I mean, Donnelly is a Democrat running in a state that went to Trump in the last election. So a lot of what Donnelly's campaign has been centered around is not that he's a Democrat, it's that he's been running as a very Trump-leaning
Yeah.
person. Like he's been quoted as saying that 60% of his vote has gone with Trump's record, whereas Braun has been saying, "I'm a true Republican. I am a
Yeah,
person who will go
definitely.
with Trump." And so it's been very interesting to see Donnelly how he has been running his campaign. Whether that will prove effective or not, I guess we'll see at the end of the evening.
Great. Thank you so much for all your experiences. And now we're going to head over to Macy. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Macy Tetrick, and I'm joined now by John Dennis, the mayor of West Lafayette. It's so good to have you here tonight. Thanks for being here.
This is a happening place. It's great to be here.
So, what are you thinking about the election so far today?
You know, this is one of those elections where it's going to be sort of pivotal, not just for the country, but for even local elections. You know, people are showing up. I have not seen such turnout in the past probably 20 years. Where I work, my office is right near a polling station. We have a polling station at the Morton Center, and the lines were down the hallway all the way past my office all day long, so it's really encouraging.
Now, how many of those students or people who are lined up were students, do you think?
Bunches and bunches. It was really awesome. The kids were showing up in numbers. They were bringing their books, they were studying, they were sitting in the hallways just like it was their classrooms. I mean, it was really an encouraging sign, and it really shows, more importantly, that your generation is really aware and is really aware that they're going to be impacted by this election.
Now, was this the case 2 years ago?
It didn't seem so much. No, not really. You know, it was kind of a dead zone because it was sort of an insider baseball election. But the way it is now, it really has generated a lot of excitement and enthusiasm.
So, what are some of the I guess, topics that are big in this election that are really going to impact the area, both Purdue and West Lafayette?
Well, when you look at the demographics of West Lafayette, we're predominantly a Democrat community. And there's been a lot of policies that have come down from the federal level that have really impacted things such as the environment, gun control. There's been issues about the dialogue around the country between minorities, women, men, etc. And I think that there's a lot of issues that are really making people think about what direction our government needs to go in, and especially folks that are around your age who don't want to live in a country where there's so much antisocial dynamic.
Do you feel positive about the outlook that we have right now?
I think I'm optimistic because there's lots of room for improvement. You know, where we sit right now, we're sort of at that pivotal point. Elections have turned into almost sporting events. There's a really strong fan base for Republicans and a really strong fan base for Democrats. And sometimes I wonder if people really understand the repercussions of what those parties stands for and the repercussions for us as a city, as a state, and as a country.
So, where do we go after this election? What do you think comes next?
Well, depending on how things go, that's going to dictate the path of travel that we take. But I think, like anything, if somebody has the courage to put themselves out there and run for office, and if they're successful, I think they need to be respected. Give them time. Let's see what they can do. Let's see how they treat the locals, and let's see how they treat, if they have a state job, or even in some cases a national job, let's see how they treat their constituents.
Thank you very much, Mayor Dennis. And next, we are going to turn it over to Nick.
Thank you, Macy. Thank you, Mr. Dennis. So we're here talking about the local races tonight. So what we're looking at right now for local races?
So I really focused on the county clerk race. I found that one very interesting. So this year we have two people running. We have Vicky Wieste, who's a Democrat, and we have Julie Roush, who's a Republican. The incumbent, Krista Coffey, is term limited, so she can't run again, but she's given some mentorship to Julie Roush. So something interesting there is that Julie Roush holds public office already. She's on the she is the Fairfield Township trustee, whereas Vicky Wieste, she's a legal professor, so she has more of a background in like the theory of the courts and their processes, whereas Roush has more of that local government experience. And their difference doesn't really come in the courts. It comes in election security and election access. So some of those key issues there. For Wieste, security meant paper ballots. It meant paper trail for voters. It means more training for poll workers. But for Roush, what that means is Tippecanoe County just needs new machines, although she believes that the current machines are still working fine. She also said it's really up to voters to make voting a priority, whereas Wieste wants to expand access to the polls in terms of hours and maybe things like mail-in ballots.
Yeah, what we've really seen in this specific race for county clerk, Julia Reese, she was hand-picked. So she's really favored right now in the polls, but Vicky she's kind of on a comeback kick because she's already has tried to run for this position but she's more determined this time around. So I think that it's kind of in for whether or not local people really know the candidates, and that's really going to make the big difference in this race.
And it's interesting because Wieste ran for House District 26 in 2016. She lost her election by just about 1,000 votes. And when you look at how incredible the turnout has been this year, she could make that up in this county-wide race.
Now, Anna, what research have you done?
Yeah, so I was really interested in the women in these elections because especially this year, there's just a record number of women running for office. So for the Indiana House of Representatives, there's actually 2 women running against each other. That's Chris Campbell, who's a Democrat, and Sally Siegrist. So when I was looking at these races, as Alex said, Siegrist was elected in 2016 for the first time to the Indiana House, and there was about a 5% difference with 1,000 votes. Then looking at their different issues that they're focusing on, Campbell focused on public education, mental health, and living wages. And then comparatively, Sarah Siegrist, she had a problem earlier in August about some messages that she had on Twitter, and she, on Facebook, on her Facebook page, has a picture that is listed, Rosie the Riveter, kind of emoting those kind of images of female empowerment as she's running for office.
Yeah.
Also, it's really interesting that Sally Siegrist doesn't seem to have an actual election webpage up, whereas Campbell does. Siegrist does have her House of Representatives page up, but not an election website.
Yeah, Anna, I was really interested in what Sally Siegrist put out over the summer about her really inflammatory Twitter posts over the summer. I think that really got some local public attention. You know, I don't think that it's necessarily going to be the determining factor whether or not she is able to retain her incumbency, but I think that Chris Campbell does have a real shot because he's really been going around looking, at education, looking at what's really important to the local community. So I think that in this state race, I think he does have a real shot compared to Sally.
Okay, thank you. Christian, what are you looking at?
Yeah, so this election cycle, I've really been watching the sheriff's race between West Lafayette Police Chief Jason Domkowski and veteran of the Sheriff's Department, Bob Goldsmith. He's been a detective there for a little while. What's been interesting about this race is you actually see them emphasizing a lot of the same issues that probably impact people in this community more on a day-to-day basis than people think. You see them both really prioritizing how we're dealing with addiction within the prisons or mental health among the police officers. We see them looking at issues such as how to keep community schools safe, since that's been such a big issue nationally, and they're the individuals who are going to provide a local response to that. So this is really a fascinating race because we have these individuals that really impact a lot within the community, and they aren't necessarily that closely followed.
All right, thank you very much. Back to you.
Hi, my name is Sydney, and if you're just joining us, I'm here with Kennedy and Carly. First off, Kennedy, tell me about the idea behind this awesome project.
Okay, so we had another group member who presented the idea for the third-party candidate for our topic, and we all agreed that it would be very fascinating to research this and come up with different candidates that expressed this in the past for presidential elections.
And what was it like producing this project, this video? How did you guys come about doing this?
Yeah, absolutely. So Kennedy and her group members gave me a lot of great information to work with as far as how third-party candidates have impacted elections in the past. So I did some research and I found some good clips from C-SPAN archives that helped me kind of put what they gave me into a visual aspect. So
great. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at the video.
Americans tend to think that the current political system is limited to only 2 parties.
Lincoln ran and won as a Republican, and after 1860, the U.S. basically settled into a 2-party system, with all elections basically between Democrats and Republicans.
Many people vote in an election not out of loyalty, but out of dislike for the other opponent, and the belief that a third-party candidate won't win.
There's a very strong incentive to vote for one of the 2 major parties, because people don't want to waste their vote by supporting a third party with no chance of winning.
But old and recent history shows that third-party candidates can play an interesting role in elections. These candidates have proven to have a unique effect on elections in the past.
The thing, if you look historically at third-party candidates, they have either a strong regional base often, or they have a strong issue. You know, you played the tape of Ross Perot, and he was always talking about that deficit and that budget.
Third-party candidates do not typically win, but they do often succeed in spreading a belief in their ideas and throwing off the outcome of an election. Eugene Debs is an example of this.
Debs was one of the most important labor leaders at a crucial time in conflict between labor and capital. But more importantly, he was the central figure in the socialist movement at a time when it was a viable, growing, and important part of the American political culture.
Eugene Debs did an impressive job of stirring the pot during his candidacy, advocating for issues that would later become a central component of FDR's New Deal, from Social Security to labor rights. Over the past 100 years, Debs' Socialist Party has evolved into the modern democratic socialist movement. Its face, Bernie Sanders, was able to make Hillary Clinton agree to major concessions, such as supporting free college tuition in the recent 2016 Democratic primary. Another prime example of a third-party candidate disrupting an election is Theodore Roosevelt.
Back in 1912, former President Teddy Roosevelt left the Republican Party and ran on the Progressive Party, or Bull Moose ticket. Roosevelt essentially split the Republican vote with incumbent William Howard Taft. It likely cost Taft the presidency, handing the Oval Office to Democrat Woodrow Wilson instead.
Roosevelt's campaign focused on ideas that many everyday working people favored more than those of the primary candidates. This earned him 4.1 million votes, second most amongst the four candidates in the 1912 election. Overall, third-party candidates accounted for 33% of the popular vote in this election. This showed a rise in progressive spirit in the United States, despite the loss of the third-party candidate. Third-party candidates, like Ross Perot, for example, can also push issues into the spotlight that might have otherwise been ignored during their candidacy.
In 1992, it was Ross Perot's turn to shake up the race.
Good afternoon. The volunteers in all 50 states have asked me to run as a candidate for President of the United States.
The Texas billionaire ran as an independent and focused his presidential campaign on the national debt.
Perot's message in '92 focused on balancing the budget, which Republican Bob Dole largely copied during his campaign in 1996. Bernie Sanders was able to do something very similar by forcing Hillary Clinton to take a more liberal stance on free college tuition and the death penalty after the primary in 2016. This secured Bernie's voters for Clinton while also promoting the ideas of his candidacy.
I do believe that when we talk about public education in America today, in a rapidly changing world, we should have free tuition at public colleges and universities. That should be a right of all Americans, regardless of the income of their families.
Today, social media plays a big role in any campaign, but especially in those of third-party candidates. Such a wide and unfiltered platform allows these candidates to have the large effect on other candidates and elections outcomes.
I'm teaching the American presidency class, and I gave this video assignment to my students.
Hi, my name is Kennedy Rush. I'm a senior majoring in history and political science, and I am in Professor Brownell's class.
First off, Kennedy, what led to the decision to focus on this topic for this 2018 midterm election?
Okay, so our group decided on the topic of third-party candidates because it's such an interesting topic because people don't normally think about that third party. They always automatically go to the first party and the second party and don't realize that the third-party candidates usually make a very big impact as well, too. So.
You made a really good point that people don't usually focus on the third-party candidates. What effect do you think they'll have on this election this year?
I definitely think that more issues will be raised and people will focus more attention on these different issues that the third-party candidates will present in their campaigns.
Well, one of the really interesting things that we did in our class is we looked at the 1912 election, and that is a really fascinating election because there are actually four parties that split. We have a Socialist Party, the Republican Party split in two, and then we have the Democratic Party. And so as a class, we did research into all of these different campaigns when you have four hats in the ring. And it actually turned out that we saw the various ways that these new parties, the Progressive Party and the Socialist Party, they actually shaped the trajectory of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party over the next century.
And what was your strategy behind putting this project together?
Definitely. I think as a team, our strategy was to really get the message behind that it was very important that we need to, as a country, to focus on these third-party candidates because they could make a big difference as well. And so we wanted to present this amazing video with amazing content that would relate to past elections and present elections.
What was really interesting too, and you can see in the video, is what great material there is in the C-SPAN video archive. And the students and the producer both mined that archive, and they were able to find great clips from earlier elections when people are talking about the role of third parties, and you can actually see the candidates themselves talk about certain issues. So this was a really great project to show exactly how you can use the C-SPAN video library.
Now, this is a little off topic, but do you think the third-party candidates this year will have an effect on the upcoming presidential election in 2020?
Very likely. You can already see the influence of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, for example. Candidates who proudly call themselves Democratic Socialists, and the ways in which, if they're successful electorally, it could signal to the Democratic Party that they need to move left on some of these issues because there are voters that want these particular candidates and the policies that they're putting forward.
Now, if there was anything you could change about the project, the way it was presented, would you? Or anything you would add?
Maybe a little bit more time just to get our ideas organized. But I think Professor Brownell did an amazing job of organizing the project, and we all had good results.
Yes. We always come under crunch lines with deadlines. It's like that for elections, and it's like that in the classroom as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I think we learned a lot from about the third-party candidates tonight. Back to you guys.
Thank you, Sydney. We continue with our election night coverage here on Fast Track News. Mike Folta, Maggie Merchkevich, and our special guest, Steve Bell, here alongside us. We do have a race we'd like to call. We know that we're going to be keeping you updated on events and races all across the country. According to CNN, in Vermont, Bernie Sanders will be declared a victor, and in Virginia, Tim Kaine, the Democrat, will win his race as well. Like we said, we're here along with Steve Bell, the former ABC News correspondent, and you've seen a lot of elections.
Go back a ways. 68 was my first election with Hubert Humphrey
Right.
and Richard Nixon.
And that's why it's great to ask you questions and why we want to ask you questions tonight.
Okay.
So, Steve, I have a question for you. Surprisingly, Americans have been saying that one of the hottest issues in this midterm election is actually healthcare reform. And I wanted to know what you think, what these elections, the kind of impact they could have on healthcare in our nation.
Apparently it's having a major impact. And the reason's pretty obvious, because we're now being forced to deal with the Affordable Care Act. How much is it going to cost? How do you really make it work? Or do you get rid of it? And if you get rid of it, what's your real plan? Or the Democrats would say, do you even have a plan? So when you talk about people's health, at my age, you care enormously about how much your health care costs. Because the potential, I'm very fortunate. I work for a major corporation. My health care is, and with senior benefits, it's one thing, but for millions of Americans, it's a huge issue. And now in this election, people are being forced to put up or shut up, or at least the process is starting.
Yes, definitely. I think we're definitely going to see some changes soon, no matter what happens tonight in the elections. I think there's definitely going to be some changes to healthcare coming up.
And would you say that the vote tonight hinges on perhaps the issue of healthcare more than any of the other issues?
I can't say that. Immigration is obviously a very emotional issue for a lot of people, but does it really cross lines enough to become the issue on one side or the other? I've seen some polls that said on the Republican side it may be the biggest issue, but healthcare, immigration, the economy doesn't get that much attention, but people would act differently if the economy weren't where it is now. How is that going to play out? Stay tuned.
Definitely.
And how do you see the economy kind of affecting these midterms? Because you're right, they haven't been talked about as much, although it seems like that'd be something the Republicans would be thumping.
It is extraordinary that the president does not spend every day in every way talking about the economy. That is a natural born winner. But when it's in the position it's in right now, he's president of the United States. He can go out and claim credit, whether you think he deserves it or not. I'm very surprised that he doesn't give more attention to the economy than he does.
We'll have more analysis throughout the night. Right now, let's go to Declan McInerney and some hot seat polls.
Hello and welcome back to the Hot Seat panel.
Hey.
I'm Declan McInerney, joined by Madison, Madeline, and Caroline. You guys, why is this election so important?
Yeah, so we've had this question up on the board for a while, and people have been answering throughout the night why they believe this election is specifically important. And some mentionable things people have said is, first of all, a lot of people mentioned that this election is important because it'll show general approval or disapproval of how things have been run the past couple years, especially under the Trump administration. And I believe that's why so many people have been turning out to vote. The voter turnout has been so high this year, and I think it's because a lot of things are at stake and a lot of things are disputed, so people are more motivated to go out to the polls this year. Other mentionable things have been checks and balances. People think this election is important because they think that that there might be a swing inside the houses. And then finally, there's a record number of women on the ballot this year, so that's very mentionable.
The other question we asked was who people voted for if they're registered in this district. So the first candidate for the Republican was Sally Segrist. So just information about her, she's a lifelong resident of this area. She grew up in the Lafayette area. She's always been involved from high school on in clubs and organizations. She's the incumbent, so she's already been elected, and she's trying to secure her seat for this year. Right now, she's on the Agriculture and Rural Development Committee, the Select Committee on Government Reduction, and the Ways and Means Committee. And she's a retired small business owner. She graduated with her master's here at Krannert, Purdue. And she started in local government when she was a Tippecanoe City Council member, and she was also on the Wabash River Enhancement Corporation.
So the Democratic candidate for this race is Chris Campbell. She's originally from LaPorte, Indiana, and got her master's degree here at Purdue in audiology. After finishing her master's, she moved away, but later returned to the district to raise her family. She's very active in the community, working in her children's schools and also being involved with the Happy Hollow School and Cumberland Road redesigns, and also planning Global Fest and being on the West Lafayette Library Board. She's affiliated with the ACLU and the League of Women Voters, and her main issues, according to her website, votecampbell.org, are funding public education, providing living wages, and supporting mental health.
So the results of our poll of who did you vote for, Sally Segrist or Chris Campbell, they just came back with 93% in favor of Campbell and 7% in favor of Segrist. And this significant gap is probably due to the fact that our sample unit and this poll has been done on a college campus with many young voters, and which always tends to trend toward more Democratic leaning.
All right, and so there's been kind of a stir, some drama on social media. How do you think that's affected the polls?
It's definitely caused some controversy amongst the two candidates. Chris Campbell talks a lot about how the community is very important to her and how she loves this area. And Sally Segrist on Twitter talked about how she can't really be a true member of the community since she's not born and raised here. And then later deleted her account after she said that when Chris didn't respond. And it's definitely been in a lot of different publications and caused lots of controversy in the comments and on different social media outlets.
All right, thank you very much, and we'll be back after this.